Hello, and welcome to this episode of Human Rights Magazine. My name is Derek McCush. The children born of war are mainly considered to be those children born to local women and fathers who have been members of an enemy, allied, or peacekeeping force. Through no fault of their own, these children often carry a sense of disgrace and shame as they grow, regardless of whether the relationship between their mother and the father was abusive, manipulative, or loving. In this episode of Human Rights Magazine, Gabriel Pryce explores the issue of children born of war.
From Norway in World War II to Bosnia and Rwanda during the 90s, and today Ukraine and Sudan, thousands of children have been born from conflict. Often labeled children born of war, these children were conceived as a result of conflict-related sexual violence or consensual relations between enemy combatants and civilian women. Due to the status of their fathers as enemy soldiers or perpetrators of sexual violence, these children commonly experience social stigmatization, material deprivation, and institutional discrimination. Yet children born of war have long been invisible on domestic and international agendas, with little effort by national governments or international institutions to provide social support, material reparations, or legal recognition. This situation is now beginning to change, thanks to the efforts of children born of war and their allies. In this podcast, we will talk with 5 such individuals who are working to achieve justice for children born due to war. Let's start with Aina Yusic. Aina serves as the president of the Forgotten Children of War Association and is a world-leading advocate for the rights of children born of war. This is a deeply personal topic for Aina, who was just 15 years old when she discovered that she was born out of wartime rape during the Bosnian War, which lasted from 1992 to 1995. I had the opportunity to speak with Aina over Zoom in October, where she kindly shared her experience of navigating social stigma and coming to terms with her identity.
Really protected by my mother and my stepfather. So all my life until that time, I never see my birth certificate. So my mother did every single thing for me. I didn't have to go anything to do. I realized that I'm child born out of rape because I was in a high school and new environment and professors asked me about father's name, and it was the first time when I said in front of the people, like, I just don't know. And it was basically, weird again. So I discovered the truth myself, and no support, to be honest, because in that moment when I found out, first of all, I didn't know what's rape. I never learned about that, but from the commentation, I saw that it's horrible. And also I was shocked because I couldn't even imagine that I'm that I'm born from something that I don't even understand, because you live in Bosnia and the first expectation was that my father died or something during the war, or, but never rape was in my mind. And the final is that I decided to be quiet. I chose silent because it was lesson learned from my mother. I saw she's silent for 15 years, so it's how we should live. And and after that, when I spoke up in a high school, I had pretty nice support by some of the professors and social workers, but these things are, let's say, individual motivation of these persons to help me. Reason why I was targeted in a high school, because we had this student book with all data about each student in the class, and in my box it was Aina X usage. That X meant like no father, no name, no identity. So school and the system, they didn't even want to think about it to put my mother. So, which tells you that they didn't care about possible my protection, in this situation. And this father's name, it follows me to here in Sarajevo. I live here 13 years. And first day when I come here on university, I finished psychology here. And first day on university, I had the same situation. And it's sometimes hard. Sometimes you have pushy people who just want to know why you don't know your father's name, or why you giving the mother's name. Sometimes you have highly respected people who just, they respect you, they just sign me. But in this situation, I had to explain why I don't have it. And, some people were behind me, and I was like, oh my God, maybe these guys gonna be in the same class as me. I became a weirdo first day. You just don't want that for yourself, because to be honest, you can build your life, in this surrounding, or even lie to people, or just don't tell the people. You still can build your life. And I just wanted to build my life without that. But that first day I was like, that's it, that's done. I don't have any bigger city to move out again. And I just decided I need to build my knowledge. I need to become mentally stronger. I need to connect myself in this city. I need to change that.
The stigmatization and institutional discrimination facing children born of war is not unique to Bosnia. In Kenya, there were thousands of cases of sexual and gender-based violence between 2007 and 2008, following an outbreak of conflict after a disputed national election. Jacqueline Mutere is a survivor of conflict-related sexual violence from this period, and conceived a child as a result. She founded the NGO Grace Agenda in 2010 in order to support fellow survivors and their children. I met Jackie through her involvement with Petrified Survivors, a sculpture designed by artist Rebecca Hawkins, which commemorates all survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, including children born of war. Over Zoom, me and Jackie discussed the challenges faced by these children in Kenya.
Really, the stigma is quite high for children. It's extended. So they extend the shame from the parent to the mother, and especially because of the nature of the conception, especially when they know that there's no man in that house, there's no father in that house, or that there is a father, but this happened when the father is not available. For example, I know in certain areas of Kenya where the husband was said to be militia, and he was in prison at that time. And so he came back when he was released, when there was amnesty called and he was released. He came back and he found that there was a son in the home, and he really dislikes the boy to date. And so that boy has had to battle a lot of stigma and rejection for a very long time. The way we experienced it, the institutionalizing of stigma, was that many of them were unable to get birth certificates. And the birth certificates, of course, have to have the father's name. And I remember mine, or in my case also, when I went there and I gave, because I named the baby my mom's name, they were, first of all, the names were too many, so there's only space for 3 names, there's only space for 2 names. Why are you burdening this child with so many names? And first of all, who's the father? And so because I saw my brother, I asked my brother to get the certificate for me. And so he sort of like appears to be on the certificate. So my brother's name is on the certificate of my daughter. But for many other people, when it became known, of course, that because of the phenomena of single children, of single mothers, of children born of rape also, it became now commonplace to put an X where the father is supposed to be. But it becomes extremely also very, very difficult to navigate some of the spaces when it comes to, for example, taking the child to school, or getting the child to go to in the community where the mother is married or is planning to settle. It becomes quite a bit of a problem during that time. So navigating institutionalized stigma, I would say it was usually when it comes to and inheriting land also, when they know that the child is not from that particular community, that child will face really difficult a lot of hurdles to jump over to be accepted, and they'll extend it from the mother to the child. Sometimes silent, sometimes obvious, but they'll still feel it.
I was keen to know more about the work that Jackie and Ina do. Jackie explained how she was inspired to found Grace Agenda after witnessing the poverty and neglect that some of the survivors' children suffered.
My main agenda, first of all, was to seek justice for the women, for the children, because I went to visit some of the girls that we had gone through with the counseling process. And after the counseling, I realized that many of the girls, I was the older one during the time in our group, being counseled at that time. So during the group therapy, I just decided to connect with some of these younger girls and see where they came from, and want to see how they're managing, because they were fairly young and they had also given birth to children. And so I visited them in their homes, and the one would tell me, "Do you see that one? That child was. Do you see that child? That child was also born from the rape. Do you see that girl? That girl was also raped." And so what happened was, over a period of time, I just brought them together. Initially, we were just four, and I brought the children together. We came to my house. We just had tea, and we said, "Now, how are we going to proceed?" Because we are fed up, first of all, of being guinea pigs for big conferences and meetings that are taking place to justify the existence of support that they're getting from international communities, and for getting money for interventions. But we also wanted to know what was going to be the end of the story for the children. So then, in particular, I saw one child that was really, really neglected, and my heart went out to her. And so I thought to myself, the first thing that we need to do is to ensure that we get justice, not really for ourselves, but to see that these children have got quality of life, that they have got something that they can look on to, because the child was malnutritioned. Her nose was running, she was badly dressed, and she had rashes on her head, and she had scaly skin, and she was really neglected by the mother. And the mother was also still a young girl and knew no better anyway, because she had also been orphaned and really knew no better. So she was only just giving the child exactly what she knew. So what she used to do is she would drug the child, go to a place and do laundry for people within the neighboring community, where she'd be able to get money, and then come back and then get money to feed the child. But she was also still so young and unable to process the pain. And so when we initially got together, what we wanted to do was to see, first of all, find out how we were going to get justice for the children, but furthermore, how we were going to engage with the truth, justice, and reconciliation process.
For Jackie, the achievement of self-agency for survivors and their children has been her organization's biggest accomplishment to date.
Self-agency of the women and the survivors. One of the key things that used to disturb us was people speaking for us. So they would speak something that was not for us, because they had their own agenda. They wanted to take their boxes. They were seeking support for what they wanted. But for me, the most greatest achievement is that, first of all, the women can speak for themselves. They can articulate what they want for themselves, and that the children that are born no longer experience the stigma, because they know who they are, based on the programs that we have made them go through. A lot of the counseling, a lot of the trauma counseling, a lot of the togetherness, the togetherness programs that we have had, because there's some mothers who do not touch their children. They would function with the children, they will feed the child, they would do all that is necessary, but they have got no intimacy or touch sensation with the child. And so one of the things that we have been doing is, first of all, memorializing. Remember, I told you our three objectives was reparations for sexual violence, self-agency, and memorialization. Because we realize also some of our comrades have fallen along the way, some of them from sheer hopelessness, some of them from two committed suicide. Out of the four that we have lost, two committed suicide, and two succumbed to the vagaries of cancer, or complications of HIV, or medical conditions, or just conditions aggravated by mental health. And so our greatest achievement is also knowing that the children walk with pride and walk with dignity. And as we speak right now, the very same children that are going to be now 17 this year they're developing a petition to take to Parliament, so that they too can be considered as survivors of sexual violence, based on the experiences that they have had from their mothers, and based on the way that they were conceived, the way that they were born, the circumstances that they have lived in, and the justice that they also seek, that from what they get from their mothers, they too deserve a portion of the same.
Similarly, in 2016, Aina participated in a research project led by Dr. Amra Delic, which brought together 33 children born of war in Bosnia for the very first time. The Forgotten Children of War Association grew out of this research project, with Aina elected as the president. In our conversation, Aina reflected on how this moment changed her life.
Dr. Amra Delic, she is a psychiatrist, psychologist, and researcher. So she was the first person that conducted research on the children born out of war. And in 2016, she gathered 33 children from all these categories I mentioned before. So she found association as a, let's say, she presented this association as a tool for us for fighting for our dignity, our rights, our place in society, which was really denied and neglected. So yeah, after that, I met her, and then I met other children, which was the most beautiful moment in my life. And yeah, I became a member, and then my friends from the association, let's say, elected me for the president, and I'm honored to have this role until today. To be honest, it's nice, and you finally understand that you are not the only person with this kind of weird identity in one moment, because yeah, we were young, you know. I find out that I'm born out of wartime rape when I was 15, and it was, you know, this time of the life in which you are trying to be socially accepted, you know, to be cool in high school and universities and everything. But you always have this part of your life, your identity, your origin that is always around you. You cannot, even if people accepted you as a normal person, even if they don't know that you are born out of rape, it's somewhere around that you need to have your buddies around. So meeting those people was really so healthy in a way that you just accept, okay, that is what it is. It happened to our mothers. It's happening all around the world. I'm not the only one. Now I have my friends, my partners, with who I can start fight if we want, even though if we don't want to fight anymore, it's also okay. It's our choice. But at least I have someone to rely on and to ask weird questions. You know, sometimes I feel like, you know, there is a lot of questions in your head, and you can call Alan or someone and ask him, like, do you feel this kind of thing?
The Forgotten Children of War Association has since raised awareness in Bosnia around the experiences of children born due to war, and successfully campaigned for key legal changes.
Huge impact. First of all, it's so nice to share. Sometimes, you know, my mother survived during the war, and everything that happened to her, it's directly connected with the war, unfortunately. But, you know, there is a huge difference between these two identities. Everything that children born out of war survived, it happened in the peacetime. So we talk about collective responsibility. We talk about how we raised our generations, and we talk how we decided as society to make some lives impossible here. So it was really nice to share and bring some light on this kind of responsibility. Because if you imagine the life in which we are accepted from very beginning, not targeted as fatherless or children of enemies, I wouldn't talk with you today. So I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't do this job. So this social visibility, this sharing responsibility among the society, bringing some human right language inside of this political mess in which we live. And we were neglected and unrecognized category inside of the laws of Bosnia. So we didn't exist in any law here. But the biggest thing is that we now have a law on civilian victims of war in which children born out of wartime rape are recognized. And we have some of the following rights that we can, you know, we can obtain the status, obtain the right, and fulfill our human rights here, which is which is nice, which is nice.
The 2022 law in Bosnia was the first of its kind in the entire world and sets an important precedent for countries elsewhere. Adriana Hanasic-Bečirovic is a human rights lawyer specializing in conflict-related sexual violence. She previously spent 12 years at the NGO Trial International and currently serves as a trustee for the NGO Grace International, where she is working to support the rights of children born of war in Ukraine. She collaborated with the Forgotten Children of War Association to achieve these legal changes in Bosnia. In our Zoom conversation, Adriana explained to me how these laws came to be and the positive impact they have had for children born of war.
Actually, it wasn't until 2022, and the war ended, just to remind ourselves, in 1995. The children born of wartime rape, as a result of the work of the Association for Forgotten Children of War and with the assistance of Trial International, and also the help of the international community in Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially the Office of the High Representative, were legally recognized for the first time as a special category of civilian victims of war. And that happened just in one part of the country because we have this complex political system, which makes Bosnia and Herzegovina being composed as a result of the war of two entities, Republika Srpska, the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the Brčko district. This is a city and a district. And it happened in this small city district called Brčko district that the children were, for the first time in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also on European soil, and one of the first examples on the global level, recognized as civilian victims of war. So it took 3 decades for those children to receive legal recognition, but it is still a step which meant the world to them back then. This move was worthy of much praise, and thanks to it, Bosnia received numerous international accolades. But however, this act was just or primarily symbolic, because children, apart from being recognized as civilian war victims, have not gained any additional rights under this law, such as priority in obtaining education and scholarship. Furthermore, some children are unable to attain this status because the recognition of this status is limited only to children whose mothers have already been granted the status of war rape victim, which excludes all other children whose mothers did not seek such status, as well as those born as a result of wartime rape who do not know their biological mother, because there are instances like that. So that it was a big move forward, but still an insufficient one. But still, I remember the moment when it happened, and I was speaking with Aina Jusic, and I remember how happy they were back then. And this made me really sad because, happy and sad at the same time, but sad for one reason. This is because they had to wait for such a long time, as I said, from 1995 until 2022, just to have a symbolic recognition that, yes, you are not the child of the enemy, like some of them have been called throughout their lifetime because of the stigmatization due to their origins, but you are actually amongst the civilian victims of war. And there is usually big empathy and big solidarity with civilian victims of war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but they have never been received through the lens of this special category of vulnerable population category of Bosnia and Herzegovina. This is why it made me really happy that it finally happened back then, but at the same time I was sad that they had to wait for such a long period of time. But as I said, this was an important but symbolic first step, so that after July 2022, another step happened in the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The law on protection of civilian war victims of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina was adopted, which recognized children born of conflict-related sexual violence as a specific category of civilian victims of war. what was important is that this time it was not only the symbolic recognition of their status, but there were also rights that they had been granted as civilian victims of war. This law provides for 8 rights that belong to children from a special category of civilian victims of war, like the category of victims of rape are called in this law. And it relates to the right to health protection, the right to priority housing, priority employment, the right to more favorable conditions for education for a child, which includes priority enrollment in public, secondary, and higher education institutions, etc. So that this was another step towards better recognition of their needs and priorities in everyday life, and it was even a better legal protection provided to them in the federation, which is one of the 2 entities, as I said, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, when compared to the Brčko district, the 3rd entity, which is actually a city, a district in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Although this law represents important progress for children born of war in Bosnia, Adriana warned that there are still barriers to its successful implementation.
It is a well-known challenge in Bosnia and Herzegovina with regard to any kind of law that is being adopted, that once it is adopted, sometimes the real fight begins, and this is a fight for improving the implementation of this law. This is really difficult in Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially in the Federation, because the Federation of Bosnia is composed of 10 cantons, meaning that given the fact that a big portion of the rights guaranteed by this law have to be implemented by the cantons themselves, you need then to work on the implementation in 10 different administrative units of the Federation in order to ensure that all of them adopt the necessary bylaws, laws, and undertake all the measures needed in order to ensure that those children do not have only access to theoretical rights or theoretical status, illusionary rights, but really effective access to the benefits and the support that they need. So that this is, I would say, the main challenge that lies ahead in the coming period. And I know that TRI International and the Association of Forgotten Children of War are already working on it, and some UN agencies are also joining them in trying to support these processes.
Due to the successes of organisations like the Forgotten Children of War Association and Grace Agenda, there has also been increased attention on the rights of children born of war at the international level. One thing that stood out to me was how many of my interviewees mentioned that growing support from the international community has helped them in their push for change at home.
So, for instance, back then, in 2022, we were relying on a back then recently issued report of the UN Secretary General that called on countries to adopt legislation and policies designed to support the rights of children born as a result of war, providing them with access to various services, from psychological to medical to legal services, and to also protect them from discrimination. And a year before that report of the UN Secretary General came out, there was also some calling on the part of the Committee on the Rights of the Child, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, and the UN CEDAW Committee, that called on countries to support children born as a result of war, advocating for their equal access to education, life skills, socioeconomic supports, cultural activities, religion, etc. So it was really important that we had those concrete recommendations that we could be presenting in our talks and written exchanges with various political actors and with the representatives of the international community, the European Union and the Office of the High Representative, that supported in the end and played a decisive role in supporting the adoption of the Byczko District Law. In that same year, in 2022, there was also the UN Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict that prepared a model law on sexual violence in conflict, which also included children born of sexual violence. And as part of this proposed law, it was recommended that children be granted the right to reparations, with a special focus on fighting discrimination, ensuring access to resources, identification in the area of identification documents, and social services such as healthcare, such as education, etc. And what was also very important in that year is that the International Criminal Court had recognized recently forced pregnancy as a war crime and a crime against humanity, and that it affirmed that children born of rape and sexual slavery are direct victims of these crimes and that they are entitled to reparations. This was also a game changer back then because the nature of the findings of the International Criminal Court in a legalistic world and worldview of people we are normally interacting with when we want to change laws has sometimes even more importance than the recommendations issued by UN treaty bodies. So that it was really an important factor which influenced this advocacy process. So that I would say that this more favorable, let's call it like that, international environment around human rights standards related to and legal standards related to the status and the rights of children born of wartime rape really facilitated our work on the grounds.
Another important programme in this regard was the UK government's 2022 Platform for Action promoting the rights and well-being of children born of conflict-related sexual violence. Erica Hall is the head of policy and advocacy at World Vision UK and a trustee of Grace International. She led the Platform for Action as a deployable civilian expert. So, what were the findings and results of the Platform for Action?
I think one of the things I would say that I'm very proud of is that initiative, which really initially focused on survivors of sexual violence, so those who experienced the sexual violence exclusively. It is really bringing them round to see, and some of it is by listening to those who were born as a result, or who work with those who were born as a result of sexual violence, to see that it has much wider impacts. And so it took a long time, but back in 2020, they started the process of saying, actually, addressing stigma has been a priority for us for 5 years. We now recognize that also really facing the stigma are the children who were born of conflict-related sexual violence. So we need to do something about that. And that's when they hired me to work on a framework for how do we address this? What do we do? And the first step in that was a call to action that was launched in 2019, 2020. I can't even actually, might have been 2021, which government signed on to, faith leaders signed on to, organizations like World Vision signed on to, saying we are going to actually consciously do something about this issue. And then we also worked, the next step was working on the platform for action. And so that was really to work with a wide group of stakeholders who know how children, obviously you still are a child born of conflict-related sexual violence, even when you're an adult, because this is the, it doesn't change. So what are the impacts? What are the key things we need to change? And then there were some areas identified for action. And so that's what that framework, the platform for action, represents. And it was a culmination of a few years of work. But I think it's highlighted all of the issues I've talked about acceptance, about legal protections, about discrimination, access to services, and support, and what is the legal framework in particular. The UK government, another initiative they had was the Declaration of Humanity, which was done by faith leaders. And so it was trying to use the role that faith leaders have in communities to help address that stigma. And I know that as World Vision, we've done some programming on this where we work with faith leaders who then have their own program of how are we standing up and saying no to the stigma, and saying you should not stigmatize these people who have experienced sexual violence or who are born as a result. And so they lead by example, by accepting the children, by accepting the survivors, and by telling the survivors themselves that they don't need to. One of the things I've seen is where survivors will go to a faith leader and say, give me some things to do in the church. I want to atone for this. And if faith leaders think, okay, I want to help you, I will give you things to do. What the best thing to do to help them is to say, you have nothing to atone for. You have done nothing wrong. And so I think faith leaders, community leaders, can really have a role to play.
Despite the gains that have been made in incorporating children born of war onto the international agenda, my interviewee stressed that there are still many drawbacks to the current international response. In particular, the experiences and needs of children born of war are still treated as secondary to other priorities.
There are so many flaws. I mean, we have this framework, but again, it's only as good as the people who decide to take it on and implement it. I think there's still one of the greatest barriers I still see is trying to, we only have so much time as advocates, and we only have so much money as advocates. And so if you look at the space, there is still so much emphasis on survivors, those who've experienced the sexual violence themselves, which obviously is really, really important. And I'm not saying don't focus on that. But even if you look at UN documents, they did a report on women who gave birth to or became pregnant as a result of sexual violence, and the children they gave birth to. But even in that document itself, it is so much about the women and the survivors, and so little about the children, only with regards to how the children's lives impact their mothers' lives. So I still feel like they're being forgotten.
Inge Schelsbeck is a professor in gender studies and peace and conflict at the University of Oslo, and an associate of the Peace Research Institute in Oslo. She is currently heading the Euro War Child Project, which explores 3 different generations of children born of war in Europe. During our Zoom conversation in September, she mentioned how children born from consensual relations between enemy combatants and civilians are still invisible in the international response.
One thing that has been extremely surprising to me as a Norwegian, perhaps, is that we find that the children conceived during World War II, especially in Norway, by German fathers and Norwegian mothers, their lives seems to have been, in a way, the hardest compared to those who have been conceived through conflict-related sexual violence. Now, that doesn't mean to say that being conceived that way is not difficult, but it has to do with the role of the mother, because the mother, when the child is conceived through conflict-related sexual violence, she is a victim. So she's not at fault. Whereas a mother who voluntarily has a child with the occupier is a traitor, and the ramifications for the child seems to, what we find in this project, is harsher. And I wasn't really prepared for that. To see, especially the Norwegian experience in that light, that what they had gone through was so difficult. I think one issue for me is that very much of the focus on children born of war now is on children born by conflict-related sexual violence. And yes, that is an important group to focus on because they haven't had sufficient focus before. But if we think about children born of war, or children who in different ways represent the enemy, these children can also be conceived through love relationship, and the ramifications for them can be the same, as I started saying. So I think that we need a somewhat broader definition and understanding of children born of war, and where the focus is on, what's the life like, what would the needs be for children who has done no crime of his or her own other than being born and having the wrong parents. What does that mean in a post-conflict setting? And then be open to that there are different groups of children that will be in that category who represent, quote unquote, the enemy. Or not quote unquote, who represent the enemy.
I asked Inga to elaborate further on the case of Norway, where thousands of children were born from consensual relations between Norwegian women and German soldiers during World War II.
If we go back to Second World War and the experiences, in particularly in Norway, the idea when the war was over and there was, that many people knew that Norwegian women had love affairs with Germans, and the Germans were also in part encouraged to have Norwegian girlfriends because they were considered, particularly good gene material, very Nordic and blue-eyed and all of this. So it was, good for the idea of the Third Reich. But then when the war ended, there were about 12,000, this is the very conservative estimate, 12,000 children born of war in Norway. And there were lots of discussions amongst politicians, the church, psychiatrists, and so on, who said, what should we do with these children? So one thing they did was that they stripped, if the mother wanted to stay with the father and they had contact or something, then they stripped the mother of her citizenship, which meant that the child would also then lose its Norwegian citizenship. So there was a whole group that went to Germany and weren't allowed to come back. So that was one thing. Another thing they also discussed, because many were orphans, they were left. Another thing they discussed at that time was to send them to Australia. There was even a delegation that tried to, see if they could send these unwanted children who were not just unwanted, but they were also seen as fifth columnists, potentially, that they could be German friendly when they would grow up. So they were also seen as a security risk.
In summary, due to the advocacy of children born of war and their allies, there has been vital progress in the last few years to recognise and protect children born from conflict, both internationally and domestically. However, this is only a beginning, and in too many countries, children born of war still remain unsupported and marginal in international discussions. To conclude, I was curious to hear from Aina and Jackie about their hopes and concerns for the future on this issue. Both explained to me that the prevalence of war today filled them with pessimism, but they hoped that through learning from past experiences and creating shared standards, future generations of children born from war will not have to wait decades for their rights.
There really still a lot of areas that concern. If we speak about the war in Sudan currently, it is vicious. And the war in Ethiopia, it is vicious. Who suffers but the communities that are there within in the midst of the war. Those communities are made up of women, and they're made up of children. They're made up of the most vulnerable, and so the rules and the engagements of war have to change. And so there's still, in my opinion, there's still a lot needs to be done. And as I've said, first of all, the rules of engagement of war needs to be in every constitution, and the rules of war, and a transitional clause within every government. It could be something, an amendment within the institution, but it's simply like, you know, the law changes and becomes applicable as society changes. What was the law now is not what was the law in the past decade or so. So we continue have to amend, and the amendments have to be considerate of women whose rights have been violated, while acknowledging that there's been a lot of visibility, but simply because of a lot of the advocacy around the work today, a lot of advocacy done by survivors themselves, and utilizing survivor-centered approaches, bringing them to the table so that they're not on the menu, that they can speak for themselves, and so that they're part of every process from conception to design to implementation. That's my recommendation.
We cannot stop wars. We see that every day. It's just more problematic. So we know the children are going to be born, and let's just create a system for them, a minimum. With the survivors, it's the same. We are all trying something, but it's repeating and repeating. But in the end, I think that at least some standards should be presented in every country. And that's it. I don't have much hope for this world in the terms of the wars and violence. But my life and my work gonna be the same. I will try everything in my power, also within my health, to support this topic, to support this visibility and recognition, and that's it. Really bad moment for this question because I'm really sad in the process of what is going on right now in the world, because I follow that because I want to be on track what is going on, and I don't like what I see, but I will not give up. We should not give up. We should build.
I would like to give a huge thanks to Aina, Jackie, Adriana, Erica, and Inga for their participation in this podcast. Their insights were not only deeply valuable but profoundly inspiring. We hope that this conversation will encourage further reflection and action in achieving justice for children born due to war.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Human Rights Magazine. The podcast is brought to you by the Upstream Journal. I invite you to consider supporting the program and the magazine with a contribution through PayPal as you explore other episodes.